Hello, great to be here. Thank you. Thank you, Glenn, for inviting me. Thank you, Neil, for proposing me. My name is Kat Ferguson. I'm the Supply Chain Director for the Lower Thames Crossing Programme, which you may have heard of a little bit in the news. So a show of hands, who has ever driven through the Dartford crossing? Great, that's good. Who has been stuck in the Dartford crossing? Great. Well, you'll know a lot more than Treasury, which is good if you saw any of the recent news. We are quite a massive project in the UK, and I'm going to show you a little bit of a video to wake you all up and give a bit of an overview about what we're about. But today really is about, I guess, I'm actually not going to go through a lot of clauses or details about a contract. I'm probably just going to set the context around what it is that we're trying to achieve and the environment we're trying to achieve it in, both political, both economically, and also in relation to the community. I'll go through what we've prioritised and why our ambition is to become the greenest road ever built, and how that's then translated into our contracts, in our relationship with our supply chain, and also how we deal with our people. So with no further ado, I'll go over and check if this works. It does. So never has road looked more interesting, and Neil will laugh at this because when I started National Highway 6 years ago, 7 years ago, maybe 8 years ago now, I thought, why work in roads? But I think this project is probably one of the only ones I've been on where I feel we have a real opportunity to make a massive change in the industry. And I guess a lot of those pictures that you saw looks like a massive, complex, technically challenging project. And in some ways it is. The tunnel is 16.9 meters diameter. It will be one of the largest road tunnels in the world once it's built. It's got huge complexities in terms of the utilities works, both north and south of the river. And it is massive just in size. Overall, about £9 billion, or 10, according to estimates plus inflation. But it is a massive project. But actually what it is also quite simple. So the overall scale may be big, but actually technically we know exactly what we're building. Our DCO, which is the Development Consent Order, which was approved very recently, sets out within almost the nearest meter what the design needs to look like and how it needs to be built. And in many ways, that gives us as a client huge scope to look at how we build it rather than what we're building. And that's one of the key drivers, actually, and one of the reasons why we're also feeling that our quest for carbon reduction is so well suited to a project like this, because we're doing things at scale. We're doing simple things, building a road and a really big tunnel, which is, in essence, purely focusing on how we can do it simpler, quicker, more efficiently, and lower carbon. In terms of the location, you obviously all know where it is. You've obviously been stuck there. But perhaps another thing from this graph, which is not showing you, is that both north and south of the river are two of the most deprived areas in the UK region. And that's a region that's been left behind for years and has not had the investment and has not had the opportunities for the people living there as it should have done. And I think there's a scene from Four Weddings and a Funeral. And do you remember the funeral where the Scottish guy dies and there's a funeral and there's this whole sort of image of the church? And that's in Tilbury, which is literally just north of the river where we come out the tunnel portal. And it hasn't changed in 30 years. And with a project like this, like any big, massive infrastructure project, it creates an opportunity to spend 9-10 billion in that region and make a massive impact for the people living in it. Positive. So this is not just about building a road. For us, this is about creating a legacy. So, context. So we've had 4 prime ministers, and we have also had probably 5-6 secretaries of state for transport. Now that in itself provides quite a lot of turbulence, I'd say, in terms of decisions being made, in terms of what are the focus areas for us as a project, but also any other project. And that is quite an important context as part of building any big infrastructure project. Now, the other graph at the bottom is around public sector debt and how that's increased over the years, making it harder and harder for any major infrastructure projects to be built in the UK without any private investment. And you'll hear quite a lot in the papers at the moment about the only way we will be built is through private funding. And that's something that we're exploring with government at the moment. But that is not going to get any better. So if you're any jobs that have public funding, there will be huge pressures on that over the years that go by. And there will need to be other solutions for how we challenge that. And the final thing over there, and depending how many HS2 people are in the room or not, is HS2. And that actually swallows up a huge amount of the spending that we would typically get from the Department of Transport. It makes it really difficult, actually, for us to, one, ensure that we have got some stability in terms of what's going to happen, but also the public perception of major infrastructure projects. Whether you like it or not, and whether you're on it or not, it has caused quite a lot of ripple effect within the supply chain, but also within other clients and also with government. The other context slide is this one, and I'm not sure whether you're all aware of this. So, historical emissions for the UK in carbon emissions has decreased over the years. And part of that decrease is generally around moving away from coal-fired power stations and also exporting significant parts of industry to China. But we've had a steady decrease of that. And you can see the CB123, it basically the government carbon budgets, which is basically what we have to commit to in law, and total emissions for the UK as a whole. And you can see that steadily reducing with the overall historical emissions also reducing, although you can see the carbon budgets are continuing to put more and more pressure in terms of what we actually can emit. The light blue line is construction, which hasn't changed. It's just got worse. And when a lot of people ask us, why do you even bother worrying about carbon? Well, legally, it's going to be very, very difficult for any major infrastructure project to be built unless you consider your carbon emissions. That's in the UK. And I've done a lot of these presentations to clients abroad, Australia, the US, Middle East, and obviously there's a lot of different ideas about whether this is right or wrong or whether they agree with it or not. But the consensus is, ultimately, we sort of want to move this way, but the industry on its own is just moving in the wrong direction. And we knew that if we're going to build LTC in that middle bit over there, between 25, 30, 35, the requirement to reduce your carbon emissions is going to be significantly more, and we will not be able to be built. So in our planning permission, we have a maximum limit of carbon emissions. And that set a precedence, will be setting precedence for any other major project. You've got to care about this if you want to be built. So what does that mean? So we have, I guess, with the context of the political climate, with the context of the carbon, and with the context of a significant amount of difficulty getting a major project up and running, and what does that mean for how we deal with our supply chain and our people, there's some really key things that we've had to focus on in order to be able to get to where we are. The first is around a strong, compelling purpose. And that's because, really, identify what matters and stick to it. And a lot of the time, we have been pushed in every single direction about reduce your cost, just make it a bit cheaper. Just take a bit of that out and it'll be okay. And actually, that strong, compelling purpose in terms of we will be the greenest road, we will create a legacy, and we will make a difference in the industry, is not just helping us guide us through what is a really, really difficult period of time to get a project up and running, but it's also attracting great people into the industry and into our project. So if you say to someone, do you want to come build a really, really nice road, or do you want to come and change the industry and build the greenest road ever built and create a massive legacy within the local region, the story is a lot more compelling. And you know that in an industry where it's actually really difficult to attract people, particularly in the roads sector, actually this matters. Yeah, it matters because it matters to the people, and it matters to the team, and it matters to our supply chain. High ambitions, we have very high ambitions. Some people say too high. We basically want to get to zero, and I'll show you a bit where we got to with that. But being really ambitious, although people are frightened by it, actually creates a sense of purpose, and people want to be part of it. Brilliant basics is said a lot, actually, but we would not be successful if we still weren't able to deliver on time, on budget. So all those brilliant things I talk about that we want to do in the legacy space, actually we still got to do all the other things absolutely right. And so our contracts and how we act around in terms of behaviors with our supply chain, it's still really important. And finally, around deliver the outcomes, a 10-year project, you've got to be able to show that you're delivering things as you go. But the people living in that community, they're going to be living 10, 15 years with a building site outside. And so they want to see the improvements, and they want to see that this actually makes a difference to their life. So our contracts, and I'm sure you'll know some of this already because it's been published, but actually getting the whole engagement process around the procurement, which I was responsible for running, was really challenging because actually it's not a massive market out there who actually can deliver these mega projects. And so therefore we end up with three main contracts. Balfour Beatty, who've got the Northern contract, which is predominantly, well, it's a lot of structures, it's a long piece of road, and quite a few sort of utilities diversions. You've got the tunnels and approaches, which is biggest in terms of value, but smaller in terms of size, is with Boyd Murphy. And then the Kent roads is with Skanska, which in essence is predominantly half a billion is in essence only utilities diversions. So there's quite a lot of, in terms of complexity, just gets you a sense of where we were. Now, we engaged significantly with the supply chain before we ended up in procurement. And I think the key takeaway from that was we shared a lot about what we wanted to do before and got comments back. So we shared our draft contract, we shared our budgets, we shared our profit, we shared our contingency, we shared every single aspect, actually, of the main procurement documents. And we had lots of comments, some good, some not so good. But the whole approach from the beginning was if we want the right contracts, if we want the right agreements in place, we got to understand what the supply chain are willing to basically buy into. And so that was a big part of that engagement exercise. Now, over to our commercial principles. These have changed a little bit over the years, I have to say. And looking at it now, I'm thinking, God, did that actually work? So we're basically a couple of years in, 2 years later, after we awarded the first contract, and we're really into the middle of it now. But it started with a realistic budget. So typically, and I'm sure HS2 had this, but any other big project, is are we willing to listen to the contractor when they say it's not enough money? And are we willing to make that change in our budgeting in order to make sure we get the right outcome? And we ended up increasing it. We ended up including a big contingency value, but we said, that's everything you've got. We haven't got any more than that. So typically, we probably knocked 20% off because that's what they always did, but we didn't knock anything off this time because we knew it's better to have a realistic budget and stick to it than a really low price and then that increasing throughout. And that simple thing was very, very difficult to get through our governance. And it created quite a lot of tension. Low liabilities, so another area that actually big feedback back from the market. They wouldn't sign up to this unless they knew that there was at least a cap at some point, which was absolutely right because otherwise they just put the price up. But actually there is quite a lot of ways in which they can make extra money. So the incentives, in terms of flexible incentives to drive that performance, and all of our incentives in essence are flexible, meaning we change them every year. Focus on outcomes. So the competition wasn't actually a technical one. It was all run on who actually could deliver the broader legacy outcomes. And in terms of focus on behaviours, the whole point has always been around how do we resolve issues as they occur. And I remember, Neil, we've done lots of training on that in previous contracts, and actually ensuring we drive that through, even though it's very, very hard to get people to change, has been really critical. And then the final, which I'll go on to a bit more detail, is continuous carbon incentives. And just go quickly onto this one. So we did a carbon baseline at the start of the project. That was in essence, it's basically a bill of quantities, but rather than the actual numbers, it had the carbon emissions in there. And you can see the round circle there that 70-80% is concrete, steel, and diesel. That will apply for any other major construction project you do. It'll be the same thing. And you can see we also had an element of risk in there. What we wanted through our procurement was a contractor that could commit to delivering a maximum limit of carbon emissions. And this was 3, 4, 5 years ago when we put this out to the market. That 2020 baseline we did basically set where we currently were. What we then did is that we applied a 30% reduction to that carbon limit, which then we used as part of the procurement. So we then asked the contractors to bid that back. What then came back, which we were really surprised at, is not only did they bid it back the 30%, the three contractors between them bid back a 50% reduction of carbon emissions at no extra cost. And the main reason for that is because carbon challenges everything. It challenges the design, it challenges what you build, how much of it you build, it challenges your materials and how much of it you need, it challenges your schedule, it challenges your supply chain, it challenges where your people come from, it challenges every single aspect of your build. And a lot of people keep asking us, carbon costs money, why even bother? And for us, it's basically unlocked this huge amount of opportunity by just looking at it differently. So the best solutions we had in dialogue were carbon reduction opportunities that then led to a decrease in cost and an increased certainty about how we were going to build it, because it requires you to plan. So I'm basically telling you, you can get this for free. You just got to ask for it. So the 50% is now a contractual limit in our NEC contracts. That's backed off with our planning permission, so it's now in law. So if we breach it, we go to jail. But we didn't want to stop there. So in our contract is a continuous quest for lowest carbon, which is actually where we're now finding the challenges. So you see the 70%, that's our new target. We want to get to 70%. We're currently at 58%. And we're doing that through working with the contractor, but we also have quite a big incentivization pot in place in order to support that. And it's not massive, but basically they get money per every ton of carbon reduced, which is again driving certain different behaviors. The big challenge for us is typically when you award a contract, the contract comes in and say, I'm just going to deliver that 50% because that's what I've told you I'm going to do. And then I'm not going to think about anything else. But over a 10-year program, that reduction is massive. Innovation comes to bear, things change, designs change, the materials change. Why wouldn't we want to be aiming for the 70%? And actually by doing it, we're realizing quite a lot of efficiencies in terms of how things are being done. So where we want to get to is, I said, the lowest, and I think there will probably be a spend on that, which we have allocated money to, but ultimately our aim is 0. So what does that mean for our supply chain? We learned that the tier ones have great ideas and great ways of challenging themselves, but the really true innovative ideas sits in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th tier. And a big part of our contract was around, and I think this is part of the NEC, is understanding where understanding your supply chain and basically having transparency about those supply chain contracts as they come forward. And that's one sort of lever to pull, but ultimately, for us, it's about finding allies. So, our tier 1 contractors turn up and they say, we've got this great thing, we're going to get to 50%, and then we're going to, and that's it. And this is the supply chain we've had before. And when you start looking at it, you realize that we've got to create an entire new supply chain to deliver this. We've got to find allies. We've got to find companies that are aligned and motivated to deliver what we want to deliver. And often, actually, they are local and they are family-owned businesses that are invested, I think, 5, 10, 15 years ahead, not just that 1 year. And that's been a big learning for us, where I think we're probably more interventionist than most contractors would like us to be. And so some of the examples here where I think it's been really great, one is around our green hydrogen. So our ambition is to be 0 emissions by 2027. That means no diesel and no HVO, only electric and hydrogen will be allowed on our site from 2027. And to do that, we've got to get quite a lot of hydrogen. And so we're currently working with a supply chain we typically wouldn't have gotten involved in before, and are learning huge amounts, but also trying to connect them with our delivery partners, with our contractors, to try and ensure that we can actually team them up and work together to find a solution that works for the site. Because I've never fueled a massive site with green hydrogen, and I don't think anybody else have ever done that either. And so it does require us to work very differently with them. The low carbon footbridge was also another interesting, where all of our designers said it can't be done, it can't be done, it can't be done. And then we opened up a competition for broader architectural practices, and we ended up with a footbridge that had 80% reduction in carbon, same cost. That's a wooden one. But that was them just challenging every single aspect of the design. And it was funny, when it sort of come forward, our designers are like, oh yeah, well, we could have done that. Yes. Carbon captured cement. So again, I've been to do several quarries already, but this is about really caring about where stuff comes from. So, if 70-80% is concrete, steel, and diesel, you care about those things, you care about the majority of your supply chain, and actually where the majority of your cost and your carbon is going to come from. So you understanding that supply chain becomes really important. And so creating relationships with those quarries and understanding how they're building stuff and how they're getting their material and how they're transporting it to you is becoming really important to us. And final is the zero emissions plant. And I think this is where, it doesn't have any difference on the design and how it's built. This is around logistics. So the diesel piece is actually one of the most challenging things we're doing. Is at the moment we're working up how do you power an entire massive construction site for zero emissions, and how do you do that with hydrogen and electric? How does that work? And what we found is we went to Bauma, which is a plant conference in Germany not long ago, and all of that is changing rapidly. That whole industry, we now know we can get 70% of our equipment using zero emissions. And sort of, I think if you haven't heard about this yet, you really need to have a look, because when we're talking to other organizations who've done this abroad, once you go that way, you're never going back. So once you're converted, that will be the change. And I keep telling everyone that in 10 years' time, diesel won't be the key fuel on construction sites. It will gradually start to transition. And we want to be the first to do that at scale. So those things have been really important. I skipped through what our contract was briefly, just so you know, it is an NEC. We have made some changes. I think there's a thing later around what's the worst clause in NEC, Z clause, is that right? Yeah, I think we have them. But yes, I was part of drafting some of them as well, but you learn later through experience. I think the key from it is realistic budget from the outset. We did reduce the compensation events in some of them, but they were part of the broader budget. We had rules in place to restrict lowball bidding, and we had a pay and gain 50-50 with basically the majority of our share goes back into incentives, actually all of it. The flexible incentivization provisions I talked about, and the supply chain transparency I've also talked about, also a critical part of it. For, looking at it now and using the contracting angle, I have to say it is more complex than I'd like it to be. We've created many guides to basically try and explain people how it's simpler. But I think that is, yeah, I know. It's not always worked. But I think it sticks to the core of what the NEC wanted to do despite all those things. And that is, how do we create better behaviors between the people on the ground? And how do we create a conversation rather than just sending out early warnings and not actually responding or talking to each other? And even now, we're all co-located in the big project office. And even the other day, we had a commercial manager on one side email a really frustrating message through CMAR to someone sitting right next to them. But it does happen. But I think we're working quite hard on trying to resolve those issues quickly. So what next? So I'm going to go on to the final bit of slide, and that is around where we're going. So, so we procured this great carbon reduction, and we have 3 bids that all deliver that. But we have an ambition to go further for 70%. The majority of the emissions sits in concrete, steel, and diesel. And the challenge we have is that our supply chain is global, and they have other clients. And if other clients don't ask for it, it's really actually difficult for us to get it. And it requires quite a lot of investment. And it also requires them to basically be geared up for doing it for you. And so we realized that in order to get some sort of a commonality in the supply chain, but also amongst clients, was to create a bit of a cheat sheet for other construction clients. And this we've done in collaboration with CLC, Construction Leadership Council. And we've now have about 7-8 major infrastructure clients signed up to this. And what this is, in essence, is basically, this is the stuff we're going to include in our contracts. So from a minimum requirement point of view to all of the supply chain, we're asking other clients to follow our lead. And firstly, require for everyone to know their numbers. So that's PAS 2080. That creates that's basically the carbon management standard. The second is to contract for low carbon. So that's using the clauses, which I think is already now in the contracts, where you have a maximum carbon limit. And the other is then, for the diesel, steel, and concrete, is to specify the timeline in which you want that delivered. So for diesel-free, we want 0 emission by 2027. But other clients, like Anglian Water, are putting 2030. And you have a concrete route map which shows the minimum amount of carbon emissions in this concrete you want, and the same with the green steel. They may seem really simple things, but they actually have a massive impact. And so to set that bar across the entire supply chain, what we're getting is clarity of the supply chain on how they can deliver it and what they need to do, and clarity from the client in terms of what their expectations are. And between that, we're hoping to drive a much bigger change in terms of how projects are delivered, but also what it gives us is a supply chain that can actually deliver the sort of things and the changes we want. So if you're doing anything, just do those, because actually it will have a massive impact. I got some final reflections, and I'm conscious of time. So this isn't easy. So when we started 5 years ago, everyone said, you're mad. And I remember we had a carbon budget in our baseline, which was challenged by government. And in the end, we won through. But, doing something new and different when, I guess, whether the industry is ready for it or not is hard. But I think we persevered. And I think the outcome we've achieved far exceeds where we thought we'd end up. The fact that you can get this stuff for free, we didn't know that. We had no idea. And the sort of adapt or die comment is, as we go through all of those prime ministers and all of those secretary of states and all of those challenges that is in the sort of political cycle and the public opinion, is we've had to adapt the contract, we've had to adapt our procurement route a bit, we had to adapt certain things with our supply chain, we've had to adapt things, but ultimately we stuck to our sort of end ambition, and we have not wavered from that. And I think in some ways it's emboldened us and wanted us to go even further, because when you see what the supply chain can actually do, it gets you really excited about what's next. Engage at every level. So that's really with the supply chain, and I think one of the key things for us was, if we're going to do this at scale, we want to work with businesses that truly believe it, where the chief exec and the board are absolutely 100% aligned with what we want to do. It becomes much easier to influence, much easier for them to put their best people on your job if you're aligned corporately. And so a lot of our work at procurement stage was to go to all the chief execs of all of those bidding companies, and we're doing that now with the broader supply chain to get absolute alignment. Does this meet your overall ambition as a company? How can we align our objectives? And how does this work for you? Every single supplier that works for us, we want them to benefit. So how can we do that in the best way? Carbon focus drives better outcomes without doubt. I think that applies at every level. And we see it playing out all the time. And the final is around find allies. There's this video on YouTube. Have you heard the dancing nut? Where there's a person who dances on their own in the field, and then everyone keeps looking at it. Some people are nodding, some people, I'm the dancing nut. But in essence, I think often when you do these things, and everyone keeps telling us, we're right behind you, don't worry, Kat, we really want you to succeed, we just want you to do it first and then we'll follow, which is fine. But it is a bit like we're dancing as nuts, and there are some people following us, but this is where construction is going. Okay, so those graphs don't lie. Those carbon budgets, they're in the law. And this problem won't go away. And as an industry, we've got a broader problem with productivity, with efficiency, with retention of people, with getting people interested to come into the industry. We are an industry that has to change. So this is one way of changing it. So I hope that gives you a bit of an overview of where we've got to. It is a huge passion of mine and a massive privilege to be on a program like this. And if you're interested, please come speak to me. And also, if you have any questions, have we got some time? We do? Okay, good. Thank you.
First of all, apologies to anyone who hasn't seen For Wedding and a Funeral and you now know the Scottish guy dies. But apart from that, and the only other thing I took from that was it's the first client to volunteer their own Worst Stakeholders of the Year award. But apart from that, fantastic presentation, Kat. Thank you. That was so engaging, so interesting, so relevant. And change. It's a massive thing. We've got time for a couple of minutes of questions. Anyone got a burning question? John at the front. Anyone else want to follow with the question?
Shall I go? Gwyn? Yeah. You said delivery partners. Delivery partners is a term which is sort of thrown around with a sort of loose meaning. Specifically, what do you mean by delivery partner? And I'm a contractual geek, so anything contractual will be.
Right. We had a lot of debate on this at the beginning, and do we call them contractors or do we call them delivery partners? And I think we were trying to move away, or at least signal to our integrated client team that these were not a sort of a second-tier contractor that works for us, they work with us. And I think the best way of doing that, it's just symbolic, it's just a word, but I think it does make a difference. So calling them partners in delivery feels much more meaningful than they're just another contractor. And so in the team, we work as one, we're all co-located. And, even things like our leadership program includes our delivery partners. So we have people from each organization working together to sort of how do we retain people, how do we train people, how do we create great leaders in those organizations?
Okay. Here's Ron.
Thank you. So the carbon bill of quantities you're talking about, just a question, like what are your plans to sort of police what the emissions actually are when you come to start construction, and how is that fed back to sort of the authorities that sort of send you to jail if you don't do it, I suppose?
So that's a great question. We're not looking for 100 QSs. That was a very real topic the other day. How do you actually measure carbon? So we're currently working with our delivery partners to understand what is the best way of doing that. We are capturing the information as we go as part of our actual cost information. And actually a lot of that is feeding into a tool that then calculates what the carbon total emissions are. So I think it will be in relation to cost, basically. And then what we have is an independent assessor that goes in and will continue to go in on a yearly basis to check. So it's something we are just trying to do in anger. I'm not saying we've got it 100% sorted, but it will be the same process I usually would do with any types of actual cost collection. But obviously there is an independent verification process, and disclosure regulations becoming more and more stringent in terms of sustainability, and any company will know that. And so actually there's a lot to do in order to set up the right data flow to do it right.
Thank you.
We'll squeeze one more quick question in, Richard.
Okay, on your NEC slide, just simple questions. I'm assuming you are doing early contractor involvement, but you didn't have that on the slide, so there's a two-stage process,
It is.
correct? Next question, I'm personally attached to this. Were you using the magic X29 for all your incentives?
We are using X29, but yes, we are.
Good
I'm
answer.
just hesitating because we've made it a bit overcomplicated.
Yeah, sure. And the last question, so much stuff in there, fantastic. Have I missed any papers that have been presented on this? Because I'd love to read this again as a published paper. Is that coming or been out?
So if you look at our website and our LinkedIn, we've got quite a lot of information we published to that. Our plan was to do a bit of how-to guide in terms of how we did the procurement and the commercial model, and the team are currently working on that, so just watch that space. But very happy to come and talk to you if anyone wants to know any detail.
Thank you. Final round of applause for Kat, please. Thank you.